Well, hello and welcome to another Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live presentation. Really excited to have you here today. My name is Guy Stevens. I'm the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. Started the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint about 2.5 years ago now, and really started it to raise awareness about the issue of restraint and seclusion in schools across the country. That said, we're very concerned about the use of restraint and seclusion anywhere they're happening, whether they're at schools, residential treatment facilities, psychiatric facilities, hospitals, senior care, anywhere these things are happening. We know there are far better things that we can be doing that are far better for working with anyone. Our mission is really to educate the public and connect people together who are dedicated to changing minds, laws, policies, and practices so that we can eliminate these practices from schools and really beyond. Our vision is to see safer environments for everyone, safer schools, safer hospitals, whatever they may be. Really excited today, as you guys all probably already appreciate. I really enjoy doing these presentations that we do, not only to have an opportunity to learn from amazing people, but to meet people that I really think highly of and highly respect. Today is no exception. We have Robbyn Peters Bennett joining us today for a very special presentation and interview. You'll have an opportunity, of course, to ask questions during today's event, and encourage you to do so. I've talked to Robbyn, and we encourage your questions during the presentation. There should be a little bit of time afterwards as well. And as always, the presentation today is being recorded, so it will be available on YouTube, Facebook, and as an audio podcast after the fact. So with that, let me go ahead and bring Robbyn up to join us. And I'm going to do a brief introduction here. Robbyn, thanks for joining us. And let me tell the audience a little bit about who you are. You are a LPC CMHS, is a psychotherapist and activist for children, specializing in the treatment of mental health issues due to child maltreatment. You've directed inpatient and residential treatment programs, worked with families and child protective services, foster care, and post-adoption. You are a Phase 2 certified Child Trauma Academy in the neurosequential model of therapeutics. Love that work on the neurosequential model. Of course, you're a national speaker. I remember the first time I became aware of your work, it was seeing the TED Talk that you did, and that in fact, I'll share that with our audience here in the Facebook page. But really amazing talk that talked about spanking and domestic violence. You also founded StopSpanking.org, an online parenting resource for parents and clinicians to better understand the harm that can happen from hitting children. And you're a board member of the U.S. Alliance to End the Hitting of Children, leading the movement to end spanking in the United States. So we are really, really excited to have you here. Robbyn, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here, Guy. I'm so happy to be here. And I'm so happy to be able to speak to your audience today. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. So I will let you go ahead and I know you've got a slide deck ready to share with us.
Right.
So if you want to bring your slide deck up into PowerPoint, I will go ahead and bring it up on the screen. And as I do, there we go. We see your slide deck. I want to remind people that are watching today, and I already see some comments coming on, but I want to remind people that are watching this that, please ask questions, make comments while this is going on. Rob and I were talking about, how nice it is to kind of have a conversation around some of this. So we're definitely going to have a lot of opportunity for you to provide your comments. So with that, Robbyn, I'm going to hand you the talking stick and let you take it away. And you disappeared. I
only did that. I know I'm tricking you, but I'm still here.
That's right.
I'm still here because I realize I'm on this PowerPoint and I have no idea what time it is. So I thought I'd grab my little cell phone here. Hopefully no one will ring me. I'll turn it down, and that way I can look at the clock.
Sounds
because otherwise I'll talk for 5 hours and you guys.
Yeah, and I might not stop you because I think people would really get a lot of value from what you have to say. I remember the first time I had an opportunity to talk to you, we just had a phone call, and it's probably about a year ago or so. But just being so moved by the work that you're doing and the perspective that you bring. So I think we're all really excited to have you here today. And I'll let you go ahead and take your presentation, and we'll break in with questions as we have them.
Beautiful.
And by the way, I do want to let you know we've already heard some from the crowd that a 5-hour talk would be amazing. So,
that's great. That's great. Okay, well, here we go. So the first thing I just want to begin with is this idea that really changed my life. It changed the way I think about children, the way I think about all my relationships. thanks to Dr. Bruce Perry, who is a huge teacher of mine. And that is that behavior is state dependent. And really everything is state dependent, as it turns out. And what do I mean by state? What I mean is your body and how your body is feeling at any given time, not on an emotional level, but on a sensation level. In other words, your stress response system network, is it operating in such a way that it is in a relaxed state and it's receptive and open and curious? Or is your system working hard to protect you from perceived threat? And so what that means is that we all can look certain ways at different times, and that our behavior fluctuates based on state. And interestingly, so does IQ. IQ can be 30 points different depending on your state of arousal. Your ability to empathize with others is state dependent. So when you're really angry and your state is aroused, of course, this is when we say things that we really regret later on. So when you think, well, that's what they really believed all along, it's like, not really. It's just what their lower brain believes, because their lower brain is frightened, even if we don't necessarily feel frightened. So there can be a real disconnect between how our body feels, how our emotions are, and what we think. And so when we're thinking about children who have experienced trauma, and also ourselves, because 60% of all Americans have some form, and it's probably much higher, actually, I was reading some studies recently, but have some form of trauma. So it's very common, and it's good to normalize it and to help us understand that trauma is not, particularly in children, I'm going to speak mostly to children, complex developmental trauma, trauma that happens when children are very small. It's called complex and developmental because those injuries have a profound effect on the developing brain over time. And so we know that, it's interesting, I sort of lost my train of thought, and that's interesting. So this is a nervous system response I'm having, and partly it's because I'm talking to my PowerPoint and I can't see Guy, and so I sort of lost my place in my mind. But so you want to help me, Guy? What was I saying?
Well, I was just thinking. Usually the effect is the opposite. Usually I make people lose their thoughts when they look at me. So
no, it's good for me. I get the head nod and I stay.
That's right. Well, I assure you, I was nodding and smiling, but I think you were kind of really getting to kind of the impact of the complex trauma, and talking about, you were kind of talking about the lower brain and
yeah. Right. And so thank you. That was so helpful. So like with children that have this complex trauma, or even episodic trauma, sometimes the behavior makes them appear less, they frightens us. They seem more antisocial. They feel more unempathic and selfish and self-centered. And so it's really important to understand that is it's not appropriate to create a character picture of your child when they're like that. That's not their true nature. It's not who they're going to be in the future. It's simply an undeveloped nervous system. It's an undeveloped stress response system network. And so what's happening is their physiology is going into a state of arousal. And for some children, it's chronic. And so they can't express their potential and what would be available to them in their upper brain. So things like being able to think of others, being able to share, to negotiate, to follow rules, to focus on their assignment. I'm going to think about schools because this group is very interested in seclusion and restraint. So children can participate in group activities and be a group citizen when their brain is fully online. And when it isn't, the last thing we want to do is have interventions that further alarm the stress response system. And so I love this picture because what you see here is what Stephen Porges would call healthy neuroceptive communication. But what you're really seeing here is a mother who clearly loves her boy. I mean, you could just feel it. Like if I just look at it, I just feel calmer. And part of what's happening on a physiological level here is she's a little bit lower than him. She's expressing lots of feeling of care. Her face is soft and she's smiling and she's there, and you can see him tilt his head. And when you tilt your head, it's a real sign of safety. So you do this and you're rigid. When you're frightened, you keep your head straight forward, which is why a lot of people have a lot of neck stress, because they're holding their body from a state of arousal. But this child is tilting his head and he's connecting. You can even see his chest moving toward her. So really understanding our physiological body language and really appreciating that we send signals of safety or we send signals of distress to children. And to really, I think this right here in and of itself would really guide our preoccupation with sort of behavioral interventions and lots of talking and cognitive interventions. And if we could notice when a child is moving out of regulation sooner, particularly in groups, because children in schools are so taxed, because social engagement is a very high functioning, higher brain capability. It's way up here. So for children to be around other children is hyper stimulating and exciting, but it's not necessarily regulating. And that's why a lot of children come home after school and they're grouchy and they're out of it. And all they'll say is fine if you ask them how they are. And it's because their nervous system has been working overtime to try to track children, read feelings. And a lot of what's happening in school is not mediated by this loving mother, for example. It would only be the memory of her inside of him that's going to help him navigate complicated social relationships where there's not really a mature person that can mirror feelings, that can help him know what's going on inside of his body, that can help him navigate things. So school is in and of itself already an environment of stress for children.
You know, that sentence on that slide, you know, about behavior being state dependent, you know, it's so interesting because, you know, as I think about schools, as you were talking about the school example there, one of the things that we sometimes hear, and I'm sure you'll not, I see your head nodding, you won't see mine, but it is this idea that, you know, people sometimes believe because a child can do something in a certain time frame that they should be able to do something all the time. And that really negates this idea about state dependency. People think, well, I know the child's capable of doing X, so they should always be able to do X. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how state, you know, kind of impacts what, and I think you were hitting on that, but how it impacts that ability? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, think about if you need to balance your checkbook, or, you know, now some people are night people, but I am not. So nighttime, someone says, balance your checkbook. That's grounds for me to like completely go into shutdown because my brain, you know, I'm just not smart at night. I like movies, I'm funny, I'm social, but doing real analytical stuff or thinking about it, doing a presentation like this, you know, I need to be doing it in the morning. I actually put this together this morning. I mean, because I'm a morning person. So, okay, yeah, I can perform on a test when I'm prepared, when I'm regulated, when I've had a good night's sleep, when I went on a long walk first, you know, all of that. Problem with school environments is that many of them don't really understand, well, one, they don't understand trauma, and they also don't understand the importance of mobility. And so, you know, we're often restricting the major avenue that children have to regulate their state by forcing them to sit in chairs, by asking them to be sedentary, by asking them to be still, by requesting eye contact when it's not spontaneous. All of these things are throwing a child further up the continuum of arousal into what's called compliance. And so what's really confusing is that sometimes you have children that are very compliant. You think, oh, what a good child. But really, a lot of those children are using strategies of dissociation in order to downregulate so that they can do what you want, but they're not following their spontaneous need for movement and for social behavior and connection with others. So there's lots of things about the traditional model of academics. It's really based in our history. I think I go back to my analyst many years ago. He was in boarding schools in a very prestigious boarding academy in England. Of course, they caned him there and he still cannot read poetry because they caned him for a Woodworth poem that he couldn't cite. But one of the things they called this really prestigious institution was the nursery of the empire. So, we really are looking at academic environments having a history of a military agenda and a militant agenda. And so we need to be thinking about how does that continue on in an unconscious way as our epigenetic inheritance, that we want to control, that we think teaching is about someone standing up in the front of a class and everyone's sitting and listening. And in fact, you can see that as soon as I'm asked to just talk, looking at a picture, I can't even remember what I'm talking about, right? Because that's a form of the nervous system going, this doesn't feel good. I'm excited to be here. I'm a little nervous. And that's just putting me a little too far outside of my window of tolerance. And I'm 53 years old and I have lots of techniques and tricks. Think about a child this age in school. What's he going to use? He's going to use dissociation.
Yeah, and often even the demands being placed on the kid may really outpace their neurodevelopmental level. Yet there seems to be no shortage of continuing to place demands on kids that aren't capable of meeting those demands, especially as we look at children that have a trauma history or perhaps have a disability with communication differences or whatever it may be that make it more challenging.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of administrators are pinched financially and don't feel supported themselves, and then they're really trained in the old school way of seeking compliance and controlling behavior, and we have an entire generation that was raised on this idea of operant conditioning. And what we learn from neuroscience and the study of trauma, which is just amazing when you really recognize it, is that operant conditioning is actually not a good method of raising children. It's not effective. It's not effective in terms of punishment, and reward is also not effective. Because reward diminishes over time. What you really want is to optimize relational reward and sensory reward. Those are the two systems you really want to engage as an educator. You want to be in a relationship. Like I saw this one, you see these videos where the teacher, she had a little thing that had a check mark, music signs, and a heart. And the child, when they came in, would hit whatever one. If it was music, they did a jig together. And if it was the check mark, they did a high five. And if it was a heart, they did a hug. And I saw children launch into her for a hug. And other children were like, nope, we'll do the dance. And it's all based on this incredible sensitivity to the neuroceptive and the physiological, the somatic safety of a child and what they need and who they are. And that in and of itself would have such a powerful effect on setting the tone for the classroom. Yeah. So I want to talk to you about some super exciting information coming out of neuroscience and the study of trauma that I think will speak to all of us as adults who have experienced trauma. I certainly have. Had a very profound traumatic childhood, and which is what launched my incredible interest in understanding my family and myself and other families, of course. So one of the things I think we all are seeking at a very deep level is this feeling of being fully alive. We want to feel fully alive. And we know that there's some damaging ways that impulse is manifested. For some of us, it may be that we seek drugs because it gives us this feeling of being alive. Or we might seek, in adults, they can have compulsive sexual promiscuous behaviors, or in adolescents, they can seek high risk behaviors, where they want to drive in a car really fast, or they want to do really risky things on a motorcycle, or they just take lots of risk. And there's something about adolescence that's already normal in that way, to be seeking novel experience, to be out there taking risk. But if there's an impairment to neurodevelopment due to early stress, there will be an overdependency of the brain to feel alive by taking risk and doing these more socially risky and antisocial behaviors. And it's biologically driven. So you can tell a child as much as you want not to drink alcohol and wear a seatbelt and don't drink and drive. But what you'll find is if this need to feel alive is not accessible to the child, they will reach out to these alternative methods of having that sensation. And even in domestic violence, there's a dynamic of needing to fight to feel real. In sex, it's often that there needs to be violence, so there needs to be a sense of danger in order to connect and to feel fully alive. And there's so many applications to how this happens, and it's really built into the brain early on, and it's something for us to really think about. So I want to just give you a little science. This is a little science section. I won't torture you with this throughout the hour, but
we love science here, so it's all good.
Wonderful. That's good. So Ruth Lanius is a neuroscientist studying trauma. She works very closely with Bessel van der Kolk, and this is her research that she's publishing. So all information comes in through the brainstem. This is what Bruce Perry understood. Information about what's going on in my body. Like right now, it's kind of warm, a little tight, but I feel pretty good. I'm kind of excited. My fingers are a little cold. Yeah, my breath is in my chest. It's not in my belly. I'm too excited for that belly breath right now. And, and I'm aware of my room. It's my practice. It's a nice space, and I'm aware of this slide. So raw information is what's happening inside of my body coming in, and that is called intraception. And extraception is bringing in information from the environment so that I know what's going on around me. And so what happens with this information is it goes up 2 avenues and eventually reaches the cortex. And what the goal here is for it to reach the cortex, both the extraceptive and the intraceptive, and for there to be sensory integration. And when sensory integration occurs, we have a feeling of being fully alive. So I'm going to just talk about the first one. So the TPJ, that's the temporal parietal junction. You don't need to know that unless you're a science junkie. I just put that in there so I remember, because I always forget. It's extraception. It's information about the environment, and it is moving through this motor vestibular system. It has to do with the head position, right? And that little child turned his head because he loves his mommy. He's like, I trust you, right? So it's head movement. It's movement in space. It's as the movement of your body moves. So this is super important because some children don't really have a sense of where their body is in space, and there's lots of reasons for that. But you'll see it because some children, they're always bumping into things, or they're always smashing you in the face and hurting you when you're playing a physical game. They always take it too far. They don't know where you are. They're poking you, or it's like a physically exhausting experience to be with some of these children. Or you'll have a child that's sedentary and doesn't really move and says, I'm fine, but, they're on screens all the time, and like this system is completely starved. So this system is absolutely critical to be online for us to feel fully alive. We have to feel our body in space, spontaneously moving, not moving the way that the school system wants you to move, but moving the way your impulse in your body chooses to move. And when trauma happens, particularly in complex early trauma, this connection is broken. And that's why you have people that often don't have a sense of their bodies. They are very clumsy. They get hurt very easily. They have lots of trouble with physical activity. They go on a hike and they fall down. They bump into things or they might even tell you, I don't really feel my body in space, or they're afraid to dance. So I'm really interested in emerging practices like movement medicine, which is a practice of moving the body through music and really beautiful narrative. David Mooney is one that does this, that's very self-affirming. And then all you do is just allow yourself to move in the way you spontaneously want to, not choreographed, right? But just pure movement. Even walking can do that. And so once that information comes into the cortex, then there's this opportunity to be fully alive. And that's when the full cortex comes online, and children can learn, and they can listen, and they can oh my gosh, Johnny shared today. How amazing. Yeah, because he wasn't completely flooded in fight flight all the time. So that's one piece. The other piece is intraception. And you'll notice for those of us that have trauma, and many of us do, when I say to someone, how does that feel in their body? They'll say, fine, I'm good. Yeah. And then they'll go on to another story about something that happened. Well, fine and good is not a sensory word. It's a cognitive word. It's a cerebral relationship to your body. And what I'm asking for is, what is happening in your body right now? And as you're listening, you might even just check in. And a good place to begin is, where's your breath? So my breath is moving down into the diaphragm because I'm having fun. And I know you're there. I can hear you, yeah, I have a pulsation in all my body. It's kind of tingly, or, and really developing language for physical experience. That's a big piece of interoception. Of course, it's also included in this is the ability to know what you're feeling and to know what's going on inside of you. But when you're in a state, particularly as a young child, where the world is dangerous, it's not safe enough to really pay attention to your body. And so this interoceptive information goes through the insula, and you can see there with the mother and the baby. And I love this picture because this is awareness of sensory experience. He is, or she, I can't tell, this little one is feeling the mother. Mm-hmm. And what he's really feeling is a mother who is in a state of well-being. And look how he sort of enjoying being on her. Mm-hmm. And so he's learning about his own sensory experience through his touch and connection to her. And that is really the biggest piece of fathering and mothering and being an auntie and a grandma. This is what the tribe teaches children. Mm. And when it goes through the insula and then it comes up into the cortex, now we have internal sensation with where my body is in space and what's going on and what's everywhere come together, and I feel alive. And that's why, like I've taken to doing like extended walks. So I used to do an hour walk, but sometimes if I have time, it'll be like a 2.5 hour walk. And what I find is the longer I'm walking, the more alive I feel. And a lot of that's because I move out of the mind state into these parts of the system where I'm getting lots of feedback. I'm moving, I'm doing all of that, what they call motor vestibular movement that really stimulates the TPJ. And I'm also aware of my body and my breath. And, so when you think about schools, how are we healing these parts of the brain in children who it's been disrupted? Because if children don't have interoceptive awareness, they often have a sense of numbness. They don't even feel their body. And I have clients with complex trauma. I treat adults too that come in and I go, "Where's your body?" They go, "I don't know." Mm-hmm. And we can live our life that way in certain jobs because our society is very interested in cortical functioning, right? Spreadsheets and being on a screen, which is very imagistically stimulating and tends to shut down all of the other sensory systems, because image is such a powerful sensory stimuli, and we're so highly rewarded when we're looking at screens that we begin to starve the other parts of the system. And that's why when you get off your computer, sometimes you feel like, where am I? And you're hungry, or you're not hungry, and you should be. And you're kind of grouchy and you're not paying attention to anybody and you're not picking up on social cues because your sensory integration isn't there. Hmm. So one of the things I think about, like even the expression of emotion and like anger, like, sometimes when my husband's upset about work or something, he's angry, I can kind of shut down because of my history, and then he feels abandoned. So what I've taken to do is get up and stand up, and I move while he's angry, and I listen and I mirror, but I keep moving, and I can stay in it, and I can really meet him in his pain and meet him where he is because I'm moving my body. And so when you're working with children that are chronically dysregulated and expressing a lot of negative affect, because they're in pain and life's hard, what's your body doing? Are you trying to slow down, shut down, and close? Or are you using your own motor vestibular intelligence to stay aware of yourself, to practice your breath, to notice what your body wants to do? If you want to move spontaneously, whatever you want to do, whatever feels good as you're listening. And you can be so much more there for people you love, whether it's your partner or your child or your students. So teachers should be moving as well and spontaneously. Yeah.
I'm thinking about what often happens in a classroom setting, especially with a lot of the kids that we find are more likely to be restrained, secluded, suspended, expelled, even exposed to things like corporal punishment. These are kids that are having a difficult time, are having a hard time regulating potentially, but the response is not. I think about, I know you're going to get more into co-regulation, but as we think about where the kids really need help regulating, what they're often met with is demands for compliance, or you talk about the movement, and maybe that movement, well, likely that movement is serving a function for the child, yet the response
Absolutely.
is to stop that movement.
Right.
So I think many times what is done in our classroom settings is really counter to what's helpful to the kid. And again, being mindful of the educator as well. They may become dysregulated through all of that also.
Yeah.
How do we, and this is probably the $1 million question here, but, how do we further change that? How do we raise more awareness? Because, once you become aware of some of these things, it seems like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. But so much of what we're doing,
it's hard in application though.
Yeah. And so much of what we're doing, you mentioned earlier, is steeped in, classical behaviorism that was performed on rats and pigeons. And, yet, we have all this neuroscience there to help us. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's two sides to it, right? What do you do once the child's already out of control, and how do you prevent the child from being out of control? And we're sort of like not really sure what we're doing on either end. It's both are very challenging. So just to meet the issue around a child actually starting to move in ways that is overwhelming, maybe they're pushing chairs, maybe they're pushing a table, knocking things over. So in terms of mobilization, what you don't want to do is you don't want to restrain, because from a nervous system perspective, what you're doing is actually preventing the child from the flight response, and then you're going to throw them in a more severe nervous system response of profound dissociation. And so what you want to do, the problem with the seclusion rooms is that they're really operating on the fantasy of what we need. We need them to stop moving. That's what we need. So what are we going to do to make them stop moving? Because it's making me dysregulated. So of course, like as a teacher, it's really frightening to have a child do that, because there's this like flock behavior, right? Where one chicken starts losing it and the rest of them are flapping their wings, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's chaos, right? So it's a super challenge for teachers, and so I think we need to make sure we're offering teachers lots of support, like where there's someone that can come in and aid and protect and support the teacher. But one of the things I would do with a child that's doing that is I would move them outside. So I would move them into a safer place where they can move and yell and whatever, but I would move with them if they're safe enough, and have someone moving with them outside and engaging them or not engaging them, just being with them, but moving the body, walking around the playground, taking in the nature that's often in a playground, which is going to offer a lot of cues of safety, right? Just the sound of birds and wind and the trees and all of that. And also just the freedom for his body to move or her body to move, where she doesn't feel like you are too close and then it's making it worse. So the more a child moves, the more they're moving into this system. The TPJ and the insula are being activated, right? Because the child has no interoceptive awareness probably when they're in rage. They just can't access that. But what they can do is get into motor vestibular movement, and then as they're moving, you can move, and then eventually you'll see them come online enough where they look at you, or you see some sort of like, bid for connection. Then you can throw a ball, you can throw a ball back and forth, or, a dodgeball so it doesn't hurt you if it hits you, or get in a swing or something like that. But even a swing is restrained at a certain level. So you have to just let the child move spontaneously. Spontaneous movement is the most important piece here, because spontaneous movement implies safety. And so that's why restraint is the opposite of what the stress response system and the nervous system really requires. And not just the nervous system. As you can see, this is it's the whole brain that's involved in this. So that's what I would say. And then in terms of prevention, the prevention would be really aware of what groups are like for children, and give children lots of alternatives when being in a group does no longer serve them. And also get comfortable with children speaking to each other and talking to each other, and create environments where children can use social engagement as a way to regulate, because they use it all the time. And if you require that they all look at you and listen to you while you're talking, that's like a withdrawal from their system. And you just need to understand that if you're doing that, try to not do that for very long, because that's asking a great deal when they're already navigating relationship, navigating everything around them. They're navigating the noise of so many children. I mean, a sensory experience is so overloaded. So if the child has autism or they have early trauma, they are just probably hanging on the seat of their pants, honestly. And so, right?
Yeah, oh, and I love what you said about kind of the brain coming back online. And I think that's what a lot of people miss is that, in doing what you're suggesting and allowing some movement and allowing some space and not being threatening and being regulated yourself, in doing some of those things, allowing the child the ability to come back online is a child that you can begin to reach. But, what we see sometimes, and you mentioned the restraint. What's interesting too to me is that, how many times I've heard this, that kids are put into seclusion so that they can self-regulate. I cannot imagine anything self-regulating being thrown into a room against your will and having the door held shut.
No,
But
they're
that's
just
very
not.
often, often
Well,
the
because it kind of
ideology.
looks like self-regulate because they
Right,
go into dissociation
right.
compliance, and so now their nervous system is completely trashed, and they're just sitting there like, and you can kind of tell because they're sort of stony and they're not looking at you, and they're and short answers, and then they go back in and they sit frozen for the rest of the day. And that's what you've taught them. You've taught them to be afraid in this environment. And then they go home and they scream and yell at their mom and they have tantrums and they can't go to bed on time and they're not hungry or they're overeating or they're just a wreck. And the parent's like, what is going on? It's like, yeah, it's hard. That's what's going on is your child's been in school all day with no co-regulation and with a punitive system that tells them not to trust their body and that what their body's impulses are not correct. And so this is how we get disconnected from our bodies all the way into adulthood. And I'm treating adults all the time. Many are teachers about where is your body and how they abandon the body because it wasn't safe to be in your body. And also really intense feelings weren't safe. And so they're cutting off from that as well. So they have shame instead, which constantly cuts them off from feeling anything and allows them to comply to what the requirements of the authority is asking, which is like the last thing we really want. That's not feeling fully alive.
And we see that a lot with kids. We see a lot of kids that begin to feel that they're no good, that they're worthless, that they can't meet anybody's expectation. Yeah, they feel the shame. Yeah.
Yeah, because shame, Ruth Lanius was talking about this. She was saying shame is basically a substitute for when you learn in your environment that emotion, raw emotion, is futile. It doesn't help you in the world. It's futile. So you abandon feeling and you don't even know what you're feeling. And that's how you survive in a compliance-dominated culture that cannot allow people to have their feelings. That's why I'm trying to move and be in my spontaneous body when my husband's upset because I want to show up for his anger because it's valid. It's okay to be angry. And I want him to be able to talk about it and move through it so that he's not living in shame and I'm not living in shame and my children and grandchildren aren't, right? This is what we're trying to, this is what Brenda Brown is always, get rid of shame. Well, we've learned at a brain level, at a lower brain level, just it instantly cuts off feeling. We don't even know we have feelings. We just know that we feel bad, and that we're shamed, right? We just know, oh, something's wrong with me. And that's not even a reality. It's just a superimposed remedy for an unsafe emotional environment, which is why we should be teaching emotional intelligence and regulation in school before we even move on to science. So I love this quote, Ruth Lanius. It's really hers, but it should have been. It's actually Ruth Lanius quoting Jane Ayres, who's an OT. So sorry for the misquote. She quoted it in 2005, that motor vestibular awareness and the sense of gravitational security. Actually, this is Ruth. It was another quote I was thinking about. What Ayres was talking about is that your connection to Mother Earth and your gravitational relationship is the a priori relationship, even before that of your mother, which is stunning because, I'm always talking about the relationship to the mother. And it's absolutely true in a neurological sense. Because if you don't know where your body is in space, you're not connected and you can't connect to others. And what Ruth Lanius is saying is motor vestibular awareness, which is like your ability to move, your ability to know your sense of balance, to move your head, to know where you are in space. All of that gives you a sense of gravitational security. And that comes from curiosity and gravitational movement within the safety of a relationship to another person. So someone who is curious about you, who you're curious about life because of them, and because you know where your body is in relationship to them and to your surroundings. So when we go against the body, when we hit the body, restrain the body, when we shut children's physiological motor vestibular experience down because we want compliance, look at me, listen to me, right? The holding, right? It's always the holding, right? Because the child wants to get away and doesn't want to look. If we started to follow the flight response in children and trust it and let them take flight and let them find their security and walk with them and be with them and then let them come to us when they're ready. This is how we build the foundation of really the stress response system being grounded in our connection to the earth, and that we can trust the body. Yeah. So given that, well, Bruce Perry knew this like 20 years ago. And so he really talks about flipping things upside down. So as a culture, we're very cortical, we're very cognitive, we're very behavioral. That's why we like behavioral interventions, because they're very cortical, they're very logical. We're starting to understand relationship and being able to mirror feelings in a child and that sort of thing. That's more limbic. But if we go even beneath that to children that are just agitated, where their state of arousal is activated, then we want to go from the bottom up. So instead of thinking about how do we teach children consequences, lecture them about what they did was wrong, what are they going to do next, let's get a behavioral plan, and all this stuff. It's such a waste of air. It's just all this talking, so much talking. And the child is zoning out while we're doing it and trying to comply, right? Just to get away from us as soon as they can. So really, if we think about regulate ourselves, right, which is welcomed touch, is restraint welcomed? No. Right? Prosodic tone of voice. How many of us were taught the firm voice when I mean it? I'm telling you, stop that right now, right? Oh my gosh, that's my mother's voice. We're already lost the game when we're there, when we're using that firm tone of voice. We're activating alarm in our children. And if we do that chronically, it creates a milieu of that kind of environment in which the brain is growing. And we don't get what we want when we do that, because we overactivate the lower brain, and then they become hyper-reactive, and their lower brain is actually larger physically. And then they look at the world as a place to be vigilant in and to expect threat. So instead, what we're trying to do is welcome to eye contact, not look at me when I'm talking to you, but hey, are you there? You know, or looking for when they look at us and smiling back and taking it slow and easy, because children will, but I work with a lot of traumatized children, and they often don't look at me until the last 10 minutes of the session. And then every once in a while, they'll give me a really long connect. And I'm like, oh, that's so amazing. And a lot of times it happens when I'm pushing them in the hammock, you know, and they're getting me touching them, push, all that motor vestibular, they're chatting, and then all of a sudden I get the eye contact, you know, or they're in the dollhouse or the sand tray and they're playing, and finally they look at me. It's a spontaneous thing. It happens when the physiology of the child feels safe. So we should not ever require it. Watch our facial expression, right? I'm always extra expressive with traumatized children because a neutral face will be read as a threat, because they're always looking for threat, not on purpose.
Well,
the body does.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you're bringing up right now really strikes something with me, because it's you know, so often people are looking at what the child can do differently, how the child can change, what do we need to do to the child, and people neglect to reflect on how important they themselves are to the situation that may, you know, and again, in many situations, it has been perhaps, and I'm not, you know, just using this as an example, but perhaps a well-meaning teacher or parent or whoever it may be, that rather than de-escalating the situation is escalating, and not realizing. And I love the what's the quote from Bruce Perry about kind of our emotions being contagions, that, you know, if we're escalated and we're using that tone of voice, and, you know, that is so has so much impact on the child that we're working with.
Well, but a lot of us as teachers and educators are traumatized ourselves, and we don't have skills to like do the intraceptive reflection, like, oh, let me slow down and feel my own body for a minute. This kid is seriously driving me nuts. You know? I think I'm losing it. You know, like, of course you are. My gosh, these are really challenging experiences, and like most people couldn't do it. So being a teacher is hard enough. So to me, it's really like about the teacher valuing their own physical experience, their own physiology, and knowing that just their own breath and pausing for themselves and just doing really long extended out breaths and moving their body and maybe going and doing something they just want to do. Like, I'm going to go get a bite of my sandwich. Yeah, I know we're still in math lesson. I'm eating. Thank you. It's what you do, because eating is regulating, and that might be what you need to do, or go get a drink of water, or chew some gum, or go out and talk to another teacher for a minute and get some co-regulation yourself, or call a teacher in and try to do it sooner before it's completely hit the fan, you know? Right? Yeah. And movement. And the other piece is like, you know, teachers are so alone, you know, I think they really need more community to be able to help them with these children and think about what does the child need and what does the behavior mean, because it's all coming from the lower brain and there's physiological origins to it. And we know that trauma is a physiological injury more than a psychological one. And the more we can appreciate that it is, like when I was talking about this circuitry, both of these circuitries are blocked for people that have trauma, or they're offline a lot of the time. It's a physiological experience, and it needs to be treated that way and thought of that way.
Yeah, you know, we had a conversation. I'm trying to remember who the conversation was with recently, talking about some of the practices, some of the trauma-informed practices, and really there was this moment where we were talking about the importance of, it's not just about what we're doing for the kids and to support the kids, but it's what we're doing to support the teachers and the staff and everyone in that environment. And you know, I think that's really important, because, you know, I'm glad to see words like trauma-informed getting more traction in schools and in other places. But if it's only a buzzword and not really getting to the practices that need to support not only the kids, but the staff, we're not going to get where we need to get.
Right.
I do want to let you know, because I told you that I would. We've been running for about 45 minutes, so I want to let people know that may have questions. We've had a lot of comments going through the comment section here, but if anybody has specific questions, I just want to give you a chance to bring those up as well. So, Robbyn, I just wanted to mention that because I wanted you to.
And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move through this pretty quickly so people can actually talk to me, and you know, we can share this slide if we want. You know, so people can have it for later. So this is just to understand that lower brain is important. And once a child's online, then to move in feeling and connection and mirroring feelings, because I'm sure you've had people mirror your feelings where you're like, shut up, I don't want to hear that. Like, it makes you angrier to have someone mirror feelings. It's just because you're more dysregulated and you really just need their presence more than like language. And then you can go to all these reasonable, you know, problem solving, talking, sharing, boundaries, telling the story, explaining later. So I'm just going to move quickly through here. This one idea I want to really have you think about, which is regulation tends to you tend to get more dysregulated over the course of the day. So when you're thinking about prefrontal things that require a lot of energy, you know, make sure you do those earlier in the day when the child is available. And a lot of math teachers already know that, and they try to get the math in early. But the other thing is to recognize there's a huge transition between home and school, and children are super dysregulated often when they come to school, even though they appear compliant. And so doing something that activates the motor vestibular system and allows children to become aware of their body, whether that's music, and you do music, and you can do a guided sort of music experience where they feel their toes and, you know, feel their face and feel their head and scratch each other's back or whatever, you know, but to do things where you're really getting that whole system online where they're fully there, because they have to recover from the fact that they left home. A lot of kids have sensory problems. They don't like to wear clothes, or the clothes never fit, or they just don't like any transition because they can't predict it, and life's very overwhelming very easily. And, you know, particularly autistic children and traumatized children often can't use facial expression and the nuances of, you know, smiling and talking and everything we communicate facially is a way to regulate. So they really need a lot of predictability. And so having a predictable motor vestibular rich experience first thing in the morning at school, and letting children come into more difficult coursework when they are ready, and helping them learn, when do you know you're ready? How do you know? What's happening in your body? That would go a long way to prevent these outbursts later where children are being forced and they're complying. They're complying a lot of times the first thing they walk in that door. I want to talk a little bit about spanking because it's a big piece for me, and it's something I think we all need to really think about. We know that violence against children is twice that of spousal abuse, and that's not even spanking in the U.S. We know that people that have experienced physical abuse are more likely to have other adverse childhood experiences. I can't really get into the study, but I can certainly give you a link and you can learn lots about it. It's a very important study. We know that people that have experienced physical abuse are 7 times more likely to have an ADHD diagnosis. Well, of course, because this is not really ADHD as much as it is dysregulation of arousal, right? And we know that there's a multi-generational transmission because our nervous systems are stress. I don't want to just say nervous system, the whole stress response system network is disorganized. And so if we can do one thing to really change our culture and our culture's attitude towards children, it is to stop hitting them. We know that children are physically punished. We're more likely to spank if we were punished, if we're in a poorer socioeconomic status, if we're under 30, if our community condones it, and our children are, no surprise, 2 to 5, because those verbal centers and the prefrontal cortex is not online yet, and we don't really know how to be with the physiology of children. And that's what we're really learning.
If I can just jump in real quick on that slide, something surprised me a little bit, and that was you said you're more likely to spank if you're under 30, and I guess my hope was, and being a little older myself, well over 30, but my hope was that things were improving and that we were seeing.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
for sure
okay,
they are.
okay.
For sure they are.
But younger parents as a whole are still.
Yeah, it's just harder. It just indicates, I think, probably more stress. But yes, there's definitely a change in public opinion, but not enough of one. It is correlated to all the things we don't want to see: increased aggression, defiance, lack of empathy, inability to have peer relationships, poor quality with the parent, dishonesty, greater ability to conceal, delayed moral development, and reduces social engagement. It reduces the brain in the prefrontal area. It is associated with lower IQ, developmental delays, lower receptive vocabulary, poor executive functioning. All of this is because the mechanism is it's disrupting the stress response system. We know that harsh parenting harms the brain, and that children that are exposed to anger, hitting, yelling when they're younger have smaller brain structures actually in adolescence. And so if we're looking for their adolescence to be easier, we need to find more peaceful, co-regulatory ways to treat them. And we know that developmental injury cascades over time. A mother's affection does not mediate the risks associated with spanking. And there was one study that showed expressing warmth after hitting a child, spanking them is associated with the child having an increased chance of anxiety, which makes sense, just like interpersonal violence. We know that harsh punishment of small children has a transactional cascading effect on brain development, meaning if you spank, it creates more spanking and more of the behavior that is eliciting the spanking, and it affects ongoing brain development, and that boys are greater risk, of course, for developing antisocial behavior because of being spanked, probably for lots of epigenetic reasons. Boys are sensitive, and they're probably historically the protectors, right? So they're more sensitive to perceived harm and should never be hit, which is sort of it's against what the cultural norm is. It's an adverse childhood experience. I'll leave a link so you can learn more about that, but it is shown to be on the continuum of violence, just like physical and emotional abuse. It's highly correlated to those two things, and as alone, without any other kind of household dysfunction, spanking is correlated to increased alcohol and drug abuse in adolescents and suicide attempts. Yeah, so it's a problem. I'm going to skip this one because I want to just say here that we have a online parenting program. It's wonderful. You can sign up. It's free, and you can have it if you want. And before I could talk about this, but I'm really interested in what people have to say before I do that.
Okay.
Questions?
Sure. Would you like to unshare your screen for a second? That way we can see each other.
Yeah.
We can come back to this too. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and you should see me, and I should see you. Right. All right, great. And I just wanted to kind of ask you one question or get your thoughts or response. As I listened to you talking about the impact of spanking, I couldn't help but make the connection between kids that are being restrained and forcibly it, that we would probably see much of the same. I mean, there's a power and a physical intervention there, and I would imagine that the impacts would be very similar. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I'm not following the research in that area, but I would not be surprised because, of course, shaking, holding, all of those things, anything that makes the child fearful of their well-being physically with you is going to have enduring effects. Now, not necessarily if it's a teacher that does it and you take the child out of that environment so they're not exposed to that anymore and the parents are loving and responsive, that mediation is really powerful for not having that traumatic event go into the future. But it's when the child is consistently exposed in relationships with people that are important, teachers and parents, where there's danger, that's where you get this traumatic response, and it will get worse over time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I want to allow some space here for questions that we might have. We've got about 5 more minutes so we might have from the audience. I see one that I'm going to bring up, but
yeah, and I can give you 10 minutes if you need it. So
okay, sounds
I don't
good.
want to cut people off.
But not 5 days like we talked about before.
No.
Okay. Well, we'll take the extra 5 minutes. So I saw one here, but I want to encourage people to also put any questions that you have into the chat. And this one is really about kids returning to school. So as kids return to school after a traumatic year in isolation, and of course it has been a traumatic year, not just on the kids, but also parents and teachers. What adjusting back into a space of peer groupings in the classroom are you suggesting? Some of it, I think you are saying right now, predictable movements first thing in the school day, and to get them in their body and ready to learn. So any thoughts on that after this really unusual time with COVID?
Yeah, really
and
hard
all the other,
time.
yeah.
Well, I think we need to think about what we want the child to learn, because the learning has to happen in the lower brain, then the mid, then the prefrontal. All right. So what are we trying to teach them? And I think the number one thing that children need to be learning right now is how to socially engage. So not necessarily science and math right now, but how to socially engage, because they've been for extended times in situations where that has not been practiced. And so I think that means that there needs to be a lot of movement, there needs to be music, there needs to be lots of rhythmic experience, lots of predictable, lots of structure, where they're allowed to have friends, where they're allowed to connect with each other in ways that is predictable and good. So not necessarily open-ended recess per se, it could be something much more structured in the classroom. We're going to do this together, and that the emphasis is on noticing each other, reading each other, what the other child is saying or feeling or thinking, and being in just nourishing that social experience so that children can begin to feel connected again, because that is what's going to help children come online, is that feeling of connection to each other and to you.
You know, we had a member of our community who wrote an article for us at one point, a really great article, and the title was Regulation Before Education. And it was a great article, but it really went to that piece about the importance of being able to regulate. And you know, I'm sure that there's a lot of emphasis on making up for lost time and all the things that have been lost.
The panic.
Right. But if we're not focusing on some of these other very important things, we're going to end up in a far worse situation, it seems to me.
And maybe not thinking like regulation before education, but this is a kind of education.
Right.
Education needs to be the whole brain. We need to educate the brain to socially relate. Then, you know, the more the child socially relates and feels regulated, they're going to have spontaneous curiosity and they're going to start expressing it. And you're going to be like, oh, this child wants to learn. And then you provide the opportunity for them to learn, and you share in that experience with them. So you're always educating. You're never stalling education. Education's always occurring. You're educating from a priority of the lower brain up into the upper brain. You're always doing that. And so we're just where we are. We're accepting where we are and trusting the body to help us learn from this huge experience we've had in the last year and a half. And those experiences are incredibly valuable. And so we want to do it the old way because it's predictive and it makes us feel secure. But to the degree that we can say, you know, we're actually going to just move into this with enormous respect for the body and for the need for community and connection. And from there, let's see what will happen. Let's see what we can create.
Great. So I have another question here. And I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on this. Any suggestions on how to converse with diehard supporters of spare the rod, spoil the child? Mostly, I don't talk to them at this at all. But I mean, how I mean, this work is hard. Convincing people. I heard legislators recently talking about. It was on a restraint seclusion bill in Maine, and one of the educators talked about, or excuse me, legislators talked about how when he was young, kids were spanked, and maybe we needed more of that. So there are definitely people out there that are advocates.
Was that a legislator?
A legislator in Maine.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is a legislator that's carrying trauma in his body,
right?
Who thinks that hurting little children is a way to get where you need to go, and someone probably spanked him. And the thing is, as soon as you bring up spanking, you activate someone's trauma, and then you can reinforce it. That's what we know about activating trauma, is that you can reinforce it if there's not compassion. So my feeling is, what I tend to do is I just am real simple and say, well, the science is really clear and it's also a violation of their human rights. And then I leave it. But then what I might talk about with this person is, what are you struggling with, by the way, with your child? Like, why is it hard? And then I'm connecting. So your child won't eat at the dinner table and won't get off the video games. Well, I wonder what's happening. And then I begin to talk to brain science. Well, this might be what's happening. I wonder if this might help or this might help. Or I really feel how hard that is, right? So we're doing what we want to do with our children with this person. We're feeling them. We're caring. We're open to their concerns. We're listening to their strategies. We're offering our own thoughts about it, and we're connecting. And that's how you shift and change people, is that, that legislator, if I was at a dinner with him alone, not with other people where it feels safe, I might say, tell me about your own experience as a corporal punishment, what it was like for you. And I might just want to hold that for him a little bit. Or I might not go that deep. I might just do light touch and go, there's some other ways. And people that are frustrated, it's because they don't have enough support in different ways. And here's some other things that work better. What do you think? And you're in connection, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's fantastic. And, I think sometimes it's easy for all of us to get entrenched on our sides and our opinions on things. And, and sometimes, again, if there's a traumatic background, or a traumatic history, or anything that might be factoring into that, pushing harder is not really what gets us someplace. Right. I've had similar conversations about things like restraint seclusion, and eventually getting to a point to say, well, gee, if we can agree that these things are risky, and not only to the kids but to the staff, if there was something that we could do that was better, that reduced risk to everybody, wouldn't we want to think about that?
And you can connect to where they care,
right.
Like instead of like always being problem solving, which is kind of cognitive, you can say, tell me about these kids you care about. Tell me about what's happening. Because what we know, and some neuroscientists was studying this, is like if you ask someone who's on the opposite end of your political continuum, who do you care about? And you start listening to them talk about that, it brings them online and it helps them be open to new ideas. But I think you have to connect to their heart. How do you care about children? Tell me about the children you care about. Tell me about why you're in this work. Tell me about what this means to you, because I can see that you care and that and so assume people do and find out what they care about, and then bridge from there to, and then you get stuck here, or you get stuck with this, or you think you have to do this, you think you have to seclude, you think you have to hit. But let's come back to how you care about the child, and I wonder if there's other ways, because I totally see you care, and I'm on your side, right? I'm with you in this. I'm not outside judging.
Can I bring you to every meeting I go to? I'd love to have you there. Well, I mean, it's important what you're saying, and that's
hard work.
Yeah,
and you need allies. You need allies to help you care.
That's right. Absolutely. So let me go through a couple quick comments here, and we're just about at time, but let me just go through a couple quick comments here. Beth said the science is really clear, and it's a violation of their human rights. Brilliant. Carrie said, hurt people. And unfortunately, we know that people that have had traumatic experiences, we may see that. Let's see. A lot of thank yous here for the presentation. Incredible presentation. Even enjoying the audience. Aaron shared, I'm actually autistic. This kind of stuff happened to me in similar ways. And Aaron, I'm sorry to hear that. I thank you for being here. You are a friend and ally, and we certainly want to work with you to change things. But a lot of really positive comments here. Robbyn, I want to thank you for taking some time to join us today. This has been fantastic. And, we've got a lot of work on very similar fronts. And one of the reasons I enjoyed getting to meet you initially was that I think there's a lot of connection between the efforts that are going forward to stop spanking and stop corporal punishment and ending restraint and seclusion. And I think a lot of us are coming from a very similar direction and wanting to do better, wanting to understand what people have been through. And your work is so fantastic at kind of making those connections, and really appreciate all that you're doing. From a legislative front, I believe there's a new bill moving forward now related to corporal punishments in school. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, there is at the federal level.
Okay. And what bill is that? Do you recall off the top of your head?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, that's okay. I know it's out there, and I'm sure that you'll probably be supporting that through your organizations as will we.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got a lot of work to do, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, and Guy, I don't know if in your video you want to put some links, but I can get a link to the legislation if people, because really calling your legislators is what's the big piece there. There's also Tate Aldrich in Arkansas, who's actively trying to get rid of spanking in the schools there. I'll send you information on the ACEs. I'll give you some things that I know I referenced in the lecture, and I will give you the PowerPoint if you'd like. That way people can hang on to things and retain them and go back and listen if they need to. Absolutely.
Be happy to share all those things. And again, if anybody wants anything specific, feel free to reach out, but we'll try to make those things available to folks as well. I already see please drop the links here. We'll try to get those when we can and make those available to everybody. So, thank you. Let's keep working together and trying to make the world a better place. And thank you for what you're doing. I will go ahead and let you go. And I'm going to make a couple quick announcements here, but I look forward to having you back on maybe at another time and talking some more and going into more depth about this.
Lovely. And I'll send the links. Thanks so much for doing.
Yep. All righty. Sorry, I didn't mean to kind of end that right there. Let me just quickly share with you what we've got coming up next, and we'll finish things off here. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's presentation. Absolutely amazing. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to talk to Robbyn and hear about her work. I do want to let you know we've got another amazing guest coming up next time, and that would be Dr. Mona Delahook. And I know many of you are big fans of Dr. Delahook's work, as am I. This will actually be the second time we've had Dr. Delahook on the program here, and we're really excited to talk about brain science and how to support kids. So that's coming up on Thursday, July 29th at 3:30. I do want to make a quick note here as well. I want to remind people that we've got a really good opportunity now to support the Keeping All Students Safe Act. We've been talking about that a lot on our website, talking a lot about the Keeping All Students Safe Act. We need people to reach out to their congressional representatives, to their senators. It's a good time to ask people to co-sponsor the legislation as well. So it has been reintroduced in both the House and Senate. We really need you to make those phone calls and connect with your representatives. Wouldn't it be great if we could get this legislation passed this time? I do also want to mention, and we've been talking this on the page, that there is an opportunity now to provide feedback to the Office of Civil Rights as part of the Department of Education. They're asking for feedback related to discipline, and they're interested in disproportionality. They're interested in guidance they can provide related to things like restraint and seclusion, suspension and expulsion. Your voices are really important, and I can tell you that taking the time to write a short note, we'll provide a link to it on the Facebook page. But these are opportunities for us to impact change, and we can influence a change. I believe that strongly, that we have the ability to influence a difference. So thank you all for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Please, as always, share these events, and we've got the recordings out available. And if you need anything, get in touch with us. So thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye-bye.